Ladies and gentlemen, let's again to the video. We're going to be talking about the GTX 970. That's right, the 970. While right now all the focus is on Pascal and Polaris, there has been a quiet battle raging focused on the previous generation of GeForce graphics card, the GTX 970, which of course is Maxwell. The GM204 based GPU was advertised by Nvidia to have 2MB of level 2 cache, 224GB per second of memory bandwidth, 4GB of RAM, and 64 ROPS. And that was, well, the case closed, right? Well, not quite. After some time, it turned out that after some investigation, users found that this was not quite the true specifications of the card. In fact, there were 56 ROPS, 1.75MB of level 2 cache, and the 4GB of memory was actually segmented into two sections. One had the full memory bandwidth of the card, while the other had considerably lower amounts of memory bandwidth available. And then there were some other issues when Nvidia said that they were going to release a set of drivers which would improve the performance of the card by putting certain assets, certain drivers, certain information in the lower bandwidth portion of the memory, the 512MB, but then that didn't happen, and then there was a whole bunch of controversy. But too long didn't read. This ended in a class action lawsuit, which is today finally been settled, which is being reported by topclassactions.com, which is a website which focuses primarily on lawsuits. So what happened? Well, I'm going to read out a section. The overall settlement amount was not publicly disclosed within court papers. However, Nvidia agreed to pay all consumers who purchased the GTX 970 graphics card. It indicated there would not be a cap on the total amount it would pay customers. The settlement is fair and reasonable and falls within the range of possible approvals. Attorneys for the proposed class action said in the filing. It is the product of extended arm's length negotiations between experienced attorneys familiar with the legal and factual issues of this case, and all settlement class members are treated fairly under terms of the settlement. So this basically means that Nvidia have agreed to pay each buyer $30 if they have purchased the GTX 970. And the company have also agreed to cover the legal fees, which have been estimated to be a rather airy $1.3 million, which is a rather expensive lesson. So the first thing you may say to yourself is, wait, I've got a GTX 970, how do I get my monies? Unfortunately, there's no information on that yet, so I imagine it's a check back, and at some point you'll probably hear it somewhere or another. Whether Nvidia are going to put that on their Facebook, probably not, or whether you're going to have to frequent various tech websites or what have you, we don't know yet. It's still, unfortunately, a bit up in the arms, and how that's going to work if, let's say, you live in, let's say, England, where you may have paid equivalently more money, well, your guess is as good as mine. But for now, all we know is that Nvidia are going to be coughing up potentially quite a lot of money. From my own personal standpoint, as someone who didn't buy the GTX 970, I still am actually happy that the result ended how it did. Not because I hate Nvidia, I don't really have any animosity towards the company at all. I think they've actually done some great things for the GPU industry, just how I feel that 3DFX have, how AMD / now, or previously ATI did. I think all companies have done their own fair shares, even Intel. But with that said, while there is controversy surrounding the performance claims, and some people will swear blind that they never had any issues with the amount of memory that they had in the card, and they could have run games using all 4GB of memory and they never had any problems at all, no swapping or anything else. Other people would say, nope, as soon as I went over the 3.5GB limits, the games become almost unplayable, or I noticed a lot more stuttering, especially if I had SLI. That be that as it may, let's take away the performance side of things first. The fact of the matter is, it was a complete screw-up by the company from a PR standpoint and a, well, a technical standpoint. And I don't mean that the way the card worked, it didn't work. I mean that they should have been clearer with the customers, and when they sent out the information to various review websites, they sent out the wrong information. They were not clear on how the block diagram of the GPU worked, and it was factually wrong. And they said, well, the marketing department weren't informed correctly. You know what, though? Before you send that information out, it should have been double-checked and triple-checked in you know, just... I don't feel that that was a good excuse, is basically what I personally believe. And for those who aren't quite familiar with the whole review process, whether you're given a card to keep, which sometimes happens in review with review samples, or whether you have to give back a card. For example, when we got sent the GTX 1070 just a few days ago, we had to give it back, but you still get given a review guide. Now, the review guide may be PR images that they give you, for example, high-resolution stock shots. It may be a whole bunch of benchmarks that they've done internally, which gives you a rough indication how the card will perform. It might give you an overview of what the card is supposed to be like under the hood. So, for example, the amount of memory the card's got, the amount of bandwidth the card's got, the various other bits and pieces which internally how the card works, and that's about it. As a fun fact, by the way, there's actually a lot less information now that you get as a reviewer compared to way back in the day, because the GPU industry is a lot more competitive. So way back in the day, they actually used to give a lot more information on how the cards worked and how the different architectures evolved over time. Now they're a little less forthcoming, and even if you probe often, they don't like to provide as much information as they once did. So I've heard through the grapevine, but that's a slight aside. So the fact is, this information slipped through incorrectly, and customers, you and I, were forking over money. Now, ultimately, to be honest, I think most folks would have still bought the GTX 970 because it's not a bad card. It's not like the reviewers were given a different model of the card. Let's say they were given a GTX 970.2, and that .2 happened to have all of the features that were advertised. No, they were still reviewing with the same hardware, so the performance numbers they were given or gave to their readers or viewers or what have you were still factual, they were still accurate. Unfortunately, what a lot of them didn't account for is when you start running SLI and start going over the amount of memory, and also the games now are taking increasingly more amounts of memory as well, so that's where users started to notice actually there's some hinky things going on here. And obviously at the end of the day, as a reviewer, there's only a certain amount of time, quite often, especially when a card is first released, you get. So, for example, it might be that for like 2-3 days in a row, you're going to have to be benchmarking, you have to take product shots, you have to do like a bunch of different things, and therefore you don't sometimes get as much time as you want, especially if you've only got one sample of the card to run as many tests as when folks get them into their own homes. So, once again, if you've got it into your home, and let's say you've been benchmarking it for 3 different months, trying to overclock and doing whatever, you're probably going to notice some, well, habits of the card. Anyway, from my personal standpoint, and once again I'm kind of waffling here, I'm happy that the lawsuit ended how it did, because I think it's good for the industry, good for the customer, and hopefully it's good for Nvidia as well, because maybe it will help them sort out their internal policies a little more and be a bit clearer with reviewers and clearer with their what's the best way of putting it? Basically, they have better internal communication. I'm not saying they did it maliciously. I don't actually believe they did, because ultimately it wasn't that hard. But with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts on this one, peoples. Has it affected your desire to buy an Nvidia card? Does it not make any difference? Have you noticed any problems if you've gone over the VRAM limit? If not, try doing some testing, like download high resolution patches, try doing high resolution downsampling, whatever you need to do, and let me know your thoughts and opinions. Anyway, with all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.